Hello, Cellar Sleuths. We're here at Villa Antinori in Tuscany, Italy, just a little south of Florence. My wife and I flew into town a couple of days ago and have been enjoying Florence and the surrounding Italy countryside. I will tell you, coming up from Rome on the train is one big vineyard. Italy has a long storied history of wine growers, vintners, and rebels. For those of you who know much about Italy wine, it's a fabulous place to taste wine because there's over 300 different indigenous varieties of grapes, which means the wines and wine styles are almost impossible to taste them all. We came here with the plan of tasting as many as we could, and we've had different wines at every meals every day. We now are in Tuscany, which is where Florence sits. We're out in the countryside. We came to Villa Antinori today because I wanted to touch on little super Tuscans before we headed further south to Montepulciano and Montalcino. We'll do another video from there probably tomorrow. But this is where super Tuscans started. For those who don't know, there was a Marchese, Incisa della Rocchetta, who started Sassicaia. Back in the 40s, he was a Sangiovese farmer, but he wanted to grow Cabernet Sauvignon of his own, just for his own drinking. So he grew Cabernet Sauvignon, but used Italy winemaking techniques, using the large wooden vessels and following the convention of adding a little white wine to the mix. So in any case, he put together his own Cabernet Sauvignon and labeled it Sassicaia, but he never sold it. He just gave it to his friends when they came to visit him at his vineyard. Some of the people who visited him, good friends, one of them was Piero Antinori, and Marchesa Antinori was a nobleman who also grew wine for many generations, his family. And so he came back home and he thought, if you can make a wine outside of Italian laws that was as good as Sassicaia, he should do the same. And what that meant was, in the 60s, Italy copied the French laws, the AOC laws from France, and called them DOC down here in Italy, and then they had a DOCG. And what these were put together to protect the local wines. And in this region, we're in Chianti Classico now, in the middle of Tuscany, it was designed to protect the taste of Chianti. In the simplest form, the DOCG gave rules that were to hold on to the flavor of Chianti. But what they did, they limited their ability for experimentation. It said you could not have more than 70% Sangiovese in your wine, and you had to have at least 10% of the local white wine grapes. But that protected the taste of Chianti, but limited a growing expansion of wine in Italy. So these two gentlemen, now we have Mr. Antinori, who returns home, and he decides to plant grapes, also grapes foreign to Italy. He brought in Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, but this time he added it to Sangiovese. The main grape was Sangiovese. He added these two grapes, and instead of using a minimum of 10% white wine, he started cutting the white wine down. And instead of using big, large oak barrels, he used small oak barriques, or what we consider the small oak barrels the French used, and started making wine. And he made a wine called Tiganello. And so Tiganello couldn't be rated as anything else than simple Vino di Tavola, which is the lowest wine on the wine pyramid. There's Vino di Tavola, DOC, and DOCG. And so because he violated the laws of making Italian wine, he was just regular table wine. It turns out Tiganello was selling for several $100s a bottle. Sassicaia came out on the market in 1968, and it too became a cult wine, selling for several $100s under the Vino di Tavola. So we had regular table wines from Italy outperforming and outselling the best DOCG wines that Italy had to offer. So the powers that be felt this had to change. What they did, they created their own IGT. It was a softening of the rules and allowing more experimentation. It didn't put all the limitations on making the wines. It allowed them to use smaller oak barrels. It allowed them to pick which berries they wanted to use, even those that weren't classic Italian grapes. A lot of the guys tried to move in some Italian grapes to keep that personality of Italy, but they brought in other grapes around the country that are very common that gave wine much more depth and darkness and fullness and body, such as Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot. So Sassicaia and Tignanello broke the mold. One of the wine writers from Britain came along, I think his name was Burton Anderson. He came along and found Tignanello and labeled it as Super Tuscan because it didn't fit anything else. It was a wine from Tuscany that was in a league all its own, and Super Tuscans were born. Now we have many Super Tuscans. It's a whole category of its own. Now there's the Tuscany IGT, Indicazione Geografica Tipica. Bulgaria, where Sassicaia came from, has its own IGT, and this class of wine brought all of Italian wines up to speed. Even Chianti Classico in the DOCG and DOCG lightened the rules. You now can have up to 100% Sangiovese. You don't have to have white wines in your mix. You can use small French barrels. All of those things started a big turn of events in Italy in the late 80s and 90s that made Italian wines much more viable on the open market and worldwide. Now, if you were a guy that didn't like Chianti from the 60s and 70s, the Chianti they make today, Antinori does a wonderful job of putting out some beautiful wines that express what Sangiovese can do. We're just getting started, and we've enjoyed Super Tuscans. We have a few more to taste yet today. Tonight we're heading into Montepulciano and tomorrow into Montalcino. Hopefully we'll put together another video and tell you what we're tasting along the way. We'll shoot some pictures on the way out. This is an absolutely fabulous vineyard setting, wine production setting here in Antinori, and we'll get you some pictures of it. Hope you guys get a chance to visit someday. These are the rooftop vineyards at Antinori. This is out over a roof of the production facility. You can see down here are air vents down into where they cellar all their wines. And there's actually vineyards up on top above us that they are now growing grapes. And actually the grapes have turned out to be so productive, they're actually selling wines. It's called rooftop wines from Antinori. Hopefully we'll get a chance to taste them later today.